Good morning, welcome to Morning Outlook. This is Kim speaking on Friday the 31st of March. So morning Ritu, just seeing as early this morning. Okay, so let's have a look at these markets. Before we do, let's just have a look at the news events due out today, which could affect the markets. It's always a key thing to do. Never fails to surprise me that traders often come into a market or into the room and say, "What just happened there?" Well, there was a news release. Anyway, here we go. So what we got going on this morning? We've got European flash estimate inflation there at 10 o'clock. So we saw the German data yesterday higher than expected. It's keeping the euro pushing up higher. We'll see what happens here in the estimates. Aside of that, really, 130 got the Canadian GDP that's released on a monthly basis. It really doesn't have quite so much oomph, but at this current stage it might just account a little bit more than normal. US dollar, then we got the core PCE price index. This is one of the most key numbers that are currently being used by the Fed, the central bank there, to decide on things, and so this is really important. This is the personal consumption expenditure. It's coming out at 130. It's a sign of inflation effectively that really hits the consumer. So we'll see how that index comes out. That could really move things this afternoon at 1:30. So be wary, buyer beware, as they say, and seller. Aside of that, then the Chicago PMI, Purchasing Managers Index, etc. As it suggests here, it's lighter, and well, perhaps we've got Lagarde speaking later there at 4, but hopefully we're done and dusted by then. But just be wary that's coming out if you're holding to positions. Right, okay, so there is some key data this morning. Let's quickly run through the majors and then I'll just choose. In fact, one of the ones I'm looking at is one of the majors. We'll see how it moves. Euro dollar. So looking from the big picture, what's happened with euro? Well, it's running pretty close into near-term highs at this stage. Solid old day yesterday in the end, and ended up pretty decent. We've seen this lovely sort of moves running through, they've carried on through the morning there into, as I say, these prior highs, into its weekly R1 as well. It's choking a little bit here at this stage. It's there's nothing to stop it running further, but it has pulled back a little bit here, not quite into the pivot. Again, we could see further upside, but the very fact it's done this double top and broken the low between the double top here, it's given me a little bit of a question mark with me, but we'll see how it develops. A pound dollar. Morning guys. Pound dollar, it's already hit R1, looking maybe to come down to its daily pivot. It's got to remember it's around about a 75% chance of being hit. However, it's already hit the pivot, the R1 there, so the probability drops down, and if it can get any momentum this morning, we could even see it run as high as the R2. So morning Eric. So there we go, that's the pound dollar. The dollar yen. Dollar yen has come down up the time frames first. It's been a little bit disappointing in the sense of I thought it might strengthen further, the yen, but it doesn't make any difference monetary wise. I've not been buying it or selling it, but either way, I was expecting it to roll over. My little old signal there, but it did push up again yesterday and softened further against the US dollar. US dollar strengthening only really against the yen. Yeah, everything else has been stronger. Now it's quite in quite a muddle yesterday, and it quite messy, so I'll leave it alone again today. Aussie dollar. Aussie, again, I'm not going to go up the time frames here. It's a messy old chart. We'll leave it. US dollar CAD, on the other hand, we'll come just look at the bigger picture here. So I've gone past my favorite little alarm area. It's broken down there, looking pretty decent. Lower highs. It's had quite a shove down. Now it was really the question today, is it going to continue? It looks quite lovely the way it's been moving. It's quite a drift to the downside. We'll see what develops this morning here. It has just sort of air kissed the daily pivot, probably kissed on some brokers, they'll have kissed the pivot. We'll see what happens though, but nice bear flag that could be on for later this morning down towards its S1, maybe further. Doesn't look like it's moved very much, but that's a reasonable, has been moving reasonably well. Oh, it's not too far at all actually. It's only it's quite a light area. It's only about 20 pips. It's quite thin in terms of potential stop, that is, at the moment. We'll see what it finishes up with. Like Euro Yen is always one on my radar. It's served me well this week. Well, it's pushing up now. It's already hit the R1, not hit the daily pivot, so on that basis R2's got a better chance. I'll see what happens post 8 o'clock on this, but again it could be a continuation here to the upside. Finally, of the list I'm looking for this morning, I've seen the Euro CAD here, and this is quite dependent on what happens with the Canadian dollar against the US dollar, I suppose. Is if it starts yielding the wrong way, I said wrong way, if the CAD starts giving up some, we might just see, if the euro can hold on and move up a little, perhaps we could see a bit more of a move here. Now the general trend here is very much to the downside, lower highs, lower lows, but it's broken that trend line through here, retraced a bit. It's would be on the verge of giving me a higher low on the breaks, so we'll see what on the next bar, so we'll see what happens. But that's another alternative for you to look at. Okay, that's pretty much it for the currencies. Let's quickly look through elsewhere. We'll look at the price of gold first. So gold picking up a little bit after me saying it looks pretty grim yesterday. It wasn't looking good for me yesterday, but has picked up, and it is potentially looking like it's got more upside here back to its R1. It just was too messy for me yesterday. Eventually kicked in the afternoon, and we see this with gold sometimes. It has its better moves later in the day, and this was no exception to that. So moving pretty reasonably there, high in. The oil then, oil continuing to drift up there. This could be something of a beginning of a bit more of a shove up, but it's certainly putting higher lows in there and moving in that sort of direction. We'll pull back to the pivot later on today and a bounce off there post 2 o'clock. This is Western Texas, could give us a reasonable move. That said, Brent, if we look at UK oil, Brent, it's already there. Look, now this might just in the next hour or two continue pushing up, hit the daily pivot already, could be pushing into its R1 later. Right, the equity markets, CSI 300, let's just look at these from a daily perspective, and well, higher low now, so that's gone out of my really ugly scene. It's sort of ended up with a higher low in there, not looking as bad as it was, and maybe moving into towards the end of a trend, but we've got to be a bit careful here because I don't think the trend line's broken that way. Oh, it has broken the trend line there now as well. So it's given us a high low, it's broken the trend line, it's starting to build the case for perhaps a bigger bounce there then. Certainly what was said yesterday by the Chinese in terms of growth expected could have the knock-on effect onto the CSI 300 there as well. Nikkei again, well, actually it's gapped up quite nicely there, moving back to the upside, turning the corner a little bit here for the Nikkei. And the Nifty, you see these markets are settling down a little bit. Nifty 50, it's been quite bearish up until now. well, gaps up today and looking a little bit better. The only thing is gaps often get filled, but it's looking better. It is quite a long way to go for it to really truly prove itself, but it already has put a higher low in there, so it has now confirmed that higher low with today's price action, and maybe we could see more of this following through. S&Ps, so the S&Ps again on daily picture here, pushed up again yesterday, trying to push up, well, currently up a little bit at the moment. It's just come down on the time frame on it here. Beautiful move over the week from its weekly pivot there. Absolute beautiful move when you look at it now. Wasn't necessarily always looking so beautiful, and certainly we had this ugliness that was sitting there previously, but it's from the sort of midish, just before the midweek, Tuesday onwards really, it's pushed up quite nicely, and we could see more of that. The more they're talking about interest rates capping off, the better it is for the equity markets. Dow Jones, of course inflation could affect these markets a bit, but just bear that in mind. Dow Jones basically following suit, had a decent week after what we've been seeing lately, and the Nasdaq, well, continues to be king of the game at the moment as it pushes up there, giving us another higher low, confirming another higher low. Looking pretty positive at the moment. As I say, be careful this afternoon with the inflation data coming out. That's the personal consumption expenditure, if you're wondering which one it is. Just to remind you, 130. Buyer beware. The DAX then this morning's continuing pushing towards its prior highs there. It's had a decent sort of week from Tuesday really onwards. It's beautiful when you look at some of these markets, and it's a bit like some of the markets that we're seeing, you know, the currencies. We're into trends here now. How long this trend's going to last is another matter, but we're in some nice trends. A bit of a retrace would look better on this. The daily pivot would be perfect today. If we get back to the daily pivot, that could give a sort of a decent opportunity. If it goes before then, well, again, as I keep saying, if it hits the R1, it could be on for the R2, so we could see some decent movement later. Would just need to get perhaps some of the current move out of the way a little, let it breathe back a bit. The FTSE's trailing quite a long way away from its highs. DAX back into the highs, the FTSE's quite a long way away, but still tickling along there at the moment, being relatively positive through the week. And again, you see the same sort of trend pushing up there. It's just that bit slower. Has confirmed a higher low on this current move. We're into basically a bit of an upward trend, but stalling where it is. And again, US inflation data could affect all these markets, so tread carefully today. And it's the last day of the month as well, just to remind you, 31st, that could have effect right the way across all markets in terms of balancing of positions, etc. Sometimes traders will, if they're looking after the accounts and they want to lock in the profit for the month, they could just be shutting out today, locking their profit in. It could be quite some volatility. That's what I'm trying to say. Okay, so we've gone through the equities there. Let's have a quick look at crypto world. It's only fair. And the crypto world, I'm just looking at this on the dailies, and this is actually the FTSE there, so it's not crypto at all. I was going to say it looks very much like the UK markets, but it shouldn't do. There we go. So Bitcoin, there's some divergence going across the there's got to be some divergences running across the highs here into its R3 on the monthly situation. Remember, this monthly pivot finishes today, so we'll have got this out of the way. It could give it the breathing space it needs to continue the move there. But there is the divergence. It gets much more bearish if it breaks the low between these highs. If it was to run back down there, we might get just some more downside, but I do wonder if it will just consolidate, and maybe as the pivots disappear, it gives it this sort of the potential of pushing up some more. Ethereum, very similar sort of picture. It's really been quite choppy of late though, not pushing quite as or looking quite so good there. Litecoin again just running through there. Finally, let's have a quick look at Ripple. So Ripple continuing, it's consolidating yesterday. Today it's pushing back up again, looking positive. Okay, that's pretty much it. I'll leave you there, and I'll catch YouTubers. I'll catch you next week. For the rest of you, I'll see you in a minute. Have a great one. There we go.